My son-in-law announced at Thanksgiving dinner in front of my grandchildren that I was no longer welcome at family holidays. My daughter sat right there and said nothing. I set down my fork, I folded my napkin, and I left. But before I backed out of that driveway, I made one phone call. And what happened over the next 90 days? They are still talking about it. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 34 years building something. A commercial real estate firm, small by the standards of the big players in Atlanta, but profitable and honest. I started it out of a 2-room office on Peachtree Industrial with one assistant, a used fax machine, and more stubbornness than sense. By the time my daughter Abigail was born, we had 12 employees. By the time she graduated high school, we had 61. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this so you understand what it meant when I handed her a life I had not been handed myself. Her mother, my ex-wife, and I separated when Abigail was 9. It was civil, as divorces go. We split custody, split assets, remained cordial at school events. I paid every cent of child support without a single late payment, and when Abigail wanted to attend the University of Georgia instead of the state school nearby, I wrote the check for 4 years of tuition, room, board, and a reasonable allowance without being asked twice. I want to be honest about something, because I have done a lot of thinking in the years since everything fell apart. I enabled her. I know that now. When she bounced a check her junior year, I covered it and told her to be more careful. When she wanted to study abroad in Italy for a semester, I said yes before she finished the sentence. When she graduated and said she wanted to move to Midtown Atlanta and didn't have first and last month's rent, I wired it that afternoon. I thought that was love. I thought that was what a good father did. What I was actually doing was building a woman who had never once had to sit with the discomfort of a consequence. She met Troy at a charity gala 3 years after college. He was personable in that polished way that takes a moment to see through. Good handshake, easy smile, always the right amount of eye contact. He worked in sales, medical devices, decent income. Not wealthy, but comfortable. I liked him well enough at first. He made Abigail laugh, and she had always been a little too serious. They married 2 years later. I paid for the wedding. Venue at a winery north of Atlanta, 212 guests, a band, a florist, the works. I did not do this grudgingly. I did it because she was my daughter, and I wanted that day to be beautiful for her. What I did not know then was that Troy had been watching how I lived very carefully since the first time he shook my hand. The trouble started slowly, the way it always does. About a year into the marriage, Abigail called to tell me they were thinking about buying a house. They had found one in Dunwoody, 4 bedrooms, good school district, a yard. They were short on the down payment. Could I help? I gave them $40,000. No paperwork, no repayment schedule, a gift. 6 months later, Troy needed help with a cash flow problem in a side business he was starting. Could I consult, maybe invest? I invested $25,000. I never saw a return and never asked for one. When their daughter, my granddaughter Hazel, was born, I opened a 529 college savings account and funded it myself. When their son came 2 years later, I opened another one. I was not keeping score. I want to be clear about that. But looking back, I realized he had a very precise mental accounting of how much I was worth, what percentage of my estate Abigail might inherit, and how to keep that number as close to 100% as possible. That meant keeping me close. It also meant, eventually, keeping me managed. The first sign I missed was how he started answering for Abigail when I called. She's busy, I'll let her know. She doesn't really want to talk about that right now. Small things. I chalked it up to the busyness of young parents. The second sign I missed was how conversations shifted whenever I mentioned updating my estate plan. Suddenly, Troy would have opinions about which assets should go where, which charitable bequests I had mentioned in the past were perhaps not the most efficient use of the estate. He said it lightly, always lightly, but he said it. The third sign I should not have missed. My granddaughter Hazel stopped hugging me the way she used to when I arrived. She was 4, then 5, then 6. Children absorb the energy of the adults around them. I noticed it and pushed the thought away. The Thanksgiving in question was last year. I drove up to their house in Dunwoody, brought a pecan pie from the bakery Abigail had loved since she was a teenager, and a toy for each of the grandchildren. I had my annual physical 2 weeks prior. Clean bill of health, blood pressure good, cardiologist pleased. I was 61 years old and I felt fine. Dinner started well enough. Turkey, the usual sides. Hazel was excited to show me she had lost a tooth. Troy opened a bottle of wine and poured glasses for everyone except me. When I mentioned it, he said, "Oh, I thought you were trying to cut back." I had never said that to him. Not once. About halfway through dinner, his brother arrived late with his wife and their 3 kids. The table got noisier and more crowded, and somehow that seemed to embolden Troy in a way I had not seen before. Like having an audience changed something in him. He started making comments, small ones at first, about the size of my house. I had recently sold my home in Buckhead and moved into a smaller place in Decatur, a practical decision since my kids were grown. "Downsizing," he said, and smiled at his brother. "At your age makes sense." I said nothing. Then Abigail mentioned that I had recently sold my share in a commercial property I had co-owned for years. A profitable sale. A decision I had made for reasons I did not owe anyone an explanation for. Troy set down his fork. He looked at me across the table. "So that money's just sitting in an account somewhere," he said. "It's in my portfolio," I said. "Huh." He nodded slowly, the way someone does when they are pretending to process something they already decided. "It's just Abigail and I were talking. We've been thinking about expanding the house, adding a second story. The kids are getting older. They need their own space. We figured with what you just made on that sale." "Troy," I said, "I'm just saying, family helps family. I'm aware of that." He picked up his fork again. "All right. Just a thought." It was quiet for a moment. Then his brother said something to his wife, and Troy, still looking at his plate, said, almost under his breath, but not quite, 61 years old, sitting on a pile of cash and his grandkids are sharing a room, says a lot. I put down my fork. Abigail was looking at her plate. "Abigail," I said. She looked up. Her eyes went to Troy, then back to me. She said, "Dad, he's not wrong. The kids really do need." I stood up. I thanked everyone for dinner. I told Hazel and her brother I would see them soon. I picked up my jacket from the coat rack by the door, and I walked out to my car. I sat in the driveway for a moment. The lights from the house were warm and yellow. I could hear, faintly, the sound of the table continuing without me. Then I took out my phone and called my attorney. His name is Philip, and we have worked together for 19 years. He picked up on the 3rd ring because he has always known that when I call outside of business hours, it matters. I told him what I wanted to do. He asked me one question. "Are you sure?" And I said yes. He said he would have the paperwork ready by Monday. Philip is an estate attorney. Among other things, what Troy did not know, what Abigail did not know, honestly, because I had not made a habit of discussing the details of my financial arrangements with anyone, was that for the past several years, most of my assets had been held in a revocable living trust, my home, my investment accounts, my interest in 2 remaining commercial properties, and the 2 529 accounts I had opened for the grandchildren. Revocable means I could change the terms at any time, for any reason, without explanation or notice. On Monday, Philip and I met at his office downtown. I spent 2 hours going through the documents. I restructured the trust. I did not cut Abigail out entirely. I want to be clear about that. She is my daughter, and I love her. What I did was much more specific than that. I established a discretionary distribution clause. Under the new terms, Abigail could not receive a lump sum inheritance. Instead, distributions would be made by an independent trustee, Philip's firm, based on demonstrated need, excluding any request that would primarily benefit a spouse or cohabitant. The trustee had full discretion to require documentation, conduct interviews, and deny requests that did not meet the criteria. The grandchildren's 529 accounts I left intact and irrevocable. That money is for their education, and nobody could touch it. That part I would never change. As for the $40,000 for the down payment and the $25,000 investment in Troy's business, I had no legal mechanism to recover those. I was not trying to. The restructuring was not about the past. It was about the future. I also, separately, made a call to the foundation. I serve on the board of a small family foundation that makes grants to workforce development programs in Georgia. I had been meaning for some time to increase my giving through the foundation. I formalized that commitment that same week, a significant pledge which would reduce the taxable estate considerably. Legal, ethical, and also very effective at clarifying for anyone who might be waiting around for a windfall just how much would actually be left. I did not call Abigail that week. I did not send a message. I went home, walked my dog, worked, and let the quiet settle around me the way it does when you have done something you cannot undo and you know it was right. She called me 10 days later. The conversation was short. She had spoken with a financial advisor. I later suspected Troy had insisted on it, and something had prompted a question about the trust. Whether I had made any recent changes. She asked me directly. I said yes. There was a long pause. Why? She asked. Because I needed to, I said. Dad, Abigail, I drove to your house on Thanksgiving with a pie from Bittersweet Bakery. I brought gifts for both kids. I sat at your table, and your husband told me that it said a lot that my grandchildren were sharing a room while I sat on money, and you agreed with him. Another pause. Longer this time. I didn't say I agreed. You said he wasn't wrong. She didn't answer that. I love you, I told her. That is not in question, but I will not fund a life built around waiting for me to die. I heard her breath go sharp. I said goodbye and ended the call. I will not pretend the following months were easy. They were not. I missed Hazel's school play because I was not invited. I sent a card and a small gift. At Christmas, Abigail sent me a brief text saying they were spending the holiday with Troy's family. I called and left a voicemail for each grandchild. What I did not do was call back and apologize for something I did not do wrong. Troy, as it turned out, had been counting on a particular financial future to fund a particular lifestyle. They had applied for a home improvement loan that spring to do the second-floor addition he had mentioned of Thanksgiving. The application required financial documentation, and somewhere in that process, either the bank or their financial advisor made clear that the inheritance Troy had presumably described as forthcoming was considerably less certain than he had presented it. I know this because Abigail came to my office in April, alone. She called the day before and asked if she could come. I said yes. She sat across from me in the same chair where I have sat across from business partners and contractors and property managers for 30 years. She looked tired. She was still my daughter, and I felt the pull of that the moment she walked in. That particular ache a parent feels when their child is struggling, even when the child's struggles are of their own making. She said, "He's been lying to people about our financial situation, telling his family, his colleagues, telling the bank apparently, that we had significant assets coming, that we were good for things we weren't actually good for." I said I suspected something like that. "I didn't know," she said. "I want you to know I didn't know how bad it was." "I believe you," I said. "And I meant it. I've been in therapy," she said. "Since January, I've been trying to understand how I got here, how I got to the place where I just sat there that night and didn't stand up for you." There was no easy answer to that. I didn't try to give her one. "I think," she said slowly, "I was so used to Troy being the person who managed everything, managed me, that I stopped having my own reactions to things. I just mirrored what he thought. And he thought you were an obstacle." I let that sit for a moment. "I was an obstacle to his plan," I said. "Yes, he's moving out," she said. "We're separating." I nodded. "I'm not telling you that so you'll undo what you did with the trust," she said. And the fact that she said it, that she knew to say it, told me that the therapy was doing something. "I know," I said. "I just wanted you to know that I see it now. What I did. What I let happen." I looked at my daughter across that desk. 40 years old, tired, embarrassed, and present in a way she had not been in a long time. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Yes," I said. "You do." She gave me one, a real one. Not a qualified one, not one that included the word but. A real one. I told her, the trust is not changing, at least not now. Not because I don't trust her, but because I need to see who she becomes when Troy is not in the picture. I told her I would be at Hazel's next school play, whatever it took. I told her the 529s are there, fully funded, and the grandchildren are never going to wonder whether their grandfather loved them. And I told her the same thing I have told her since she was a little girl sitting on the floor of my office drawing while I worked late, that I am proud of her when she is honest, even when honesty is hard, and especially when it costs her something. She drove away from my office that afternoon, and I stood in the parking lot until I couldn't see her car anymore. I have been asked, when I tell this story to people I trust, whether I regret the Thanksgiving, whether I regret leaving, making the call, restructuring the trust, whether it was worth the months of silence, the missed play, the Christmas alone. And I always say the same thing. The only thing I regret is that I waited 61 years to understand that love is not a checkbook, that giving without limit is not generosity, it is avoidance. I was avoiding the harder work of teaching my daughter that money is a tool, not an identity, and that the people who love you should love you when the checkbook is closed. I learned that late, but I learned it. There is a photograph on my desk now. It was taken last month, when Abigail and the grandchildren came for Sunday dinner. Hazel is on my lap. Her brother has his arms around my neck from behind. Abigail is standing to the side, and she is smiling in a way I recognize from when she was young, before all of it. A real smile, not a managed one. Troy is not in the photograph. Some mornings I make coffee and stand at the window and think about the man who sat across from me at Thanksgiving and said in front of my grandchildren that it said a lot. And I think about what it must have been like for him to realize, sometime in the weeks after, that the plan he had spent years building had no foundation under it. And then I finish my coffee and I go to work. Because that is what men like me do. We build things. I have thought a lot about what I would tell a younger version of myself. The man who wired money the same afternoon his daughter asked, who wrote checks before the sentence was finished, who believed that saying yes fast enough was the same thing as being a good father. I would tell him, you are not being generous. You are being afraid. Afraid that if you said no, she would love you less. Afraid that the distance between you, the divorce, the years of split holidays and different houses, could be closed with a wire transfer. It cannot, it never could, and every check you write to avoid that conversation is a lesson you are not teaching her about what the world actually requires of a person. Troy did not come from nowhere. I built the conditions that made a Troy possible, a woman who had never sat with a consequence, never felt the specific discomfort of wanting something she could not immediately have. That woman was always going to be vulnerable to someone who promised to manage everything for her. He didn't manipulate her from a position of strength. He stepped into a vacancy I had created. That is hard to say. It is true, and it is hard. What I understand now, at 61, is that there are 3 things a father actually owes his children. Not money. Not ease, not the removal of every obstacle from the path. The first is honesty, including the honesty to say I won't instead of I can't, and to mean it. Abigail grew up watching me solve every problem with resources. She never learned that some problems are supposed to be solved by the person who created them. That was my failure, not hers. The second is consequence, real ones, delivered with love and without apology, not cruelty, not punishment for its own sake, but the simple, clear experience of cause and effect that tells a young person the world responds to what you do. This is not negotiable. This is not something money can suspend indefinitely. I suspended it for 20 years, and the bill came due at a Thanksgiving table in Dunwoody. The third is presence. Not the presence of a checkbook, but the presence of a person. Showing up and staying in the room even when the conversation is hard. I had not done enough of that. I had confused funding her life with being part of it. When Abigail sat across from me in my office that April and said, I didn't know how bad it was, and I believed her, That was the first honest moment we had shared in years. Maybe longer. The therapy, the separation, the willingness to sit in that chair and say the hard thing without softening it into something more comfortable. That was not weakness. That was the first real evidence I had seen of the woman I always hoped she would become. And I want to be clear about something. I did not restructure that trust to punish her. I did it because the version of love I had been practicing was not working. Not for her, not for me, not for Hazel and her brother, who deserve a mother who knows who she is. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is stop catching someone before they fall. Not because you don't care, because you do. The photograph on my desk, Hazel on my lap, her brother's arms around my neck, Abigail smiling the way she smiled when she was 7 years old, and didn't yet know that her father's love had a dollar amount attached to it. Because it didn't then, and it doesn't now. That is what I was protecting all along. I just had to learn, the hard way, how.